10 times today, but I'll do it again anyways. Again, to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Paula Fletcher. I'm one of the Associate Deans in Grad Studies, and I'm also a professor in kin. I've been at Laurier for about 25 years now. And to me, the best part of my job is mentoring students. It's the thing that makes me want to come to work every day, supervising students in some capacity or teaching students. So to me, this is an important session for you to attend. And I just want to make sure you're in the right session. So this session is for students who have a supervisor in hand. Is that correct? You already all have a supervisor. Yes, perfect. There we go. That's exactly what I want to hear. So without further ado, how we're going to do this is I have asked different groups of students and their supervisors to come in, and they've been given about 10 minutes in each group to talk about the supervisor-supervisee relationship. And then we're going to have time for questions in between each group, as well as at the end. Does that sound good? So they'll give you all the time you want to ask questions, but I would just like to introduce each group first. So to start, we have, and I'll let you go, ladies and Hashim go first. You've already met Hashim from this morning, international student. He is from kin, and he is co-supervised by Dr. Jen Robertson-Wilson and Dr. Pam Bryden. And so the reason why I brought this group in is because it is a different type of mentorship relationship. Now, do you not only have to get the approval of one supervisor, and now you have a second. And so they've been in their supervisory relationship for about 2 years, so they'll give you some tips and tricks and some advice for that. The next group is Dr. Susan Nyland, who is a professor in history, and her student, who is Graham Taylor, who's also in history. Okay, so now you're going to look at someone who's in the arts program and a dual, a dyad. And the last group, not least though, is Dr. Matt Smith, who's in biology, and his student, Mike Fish, who's also in biology. So now from the science stream. So you have 3 different areas: kin, history, as well as biology, male, female, male, male. So all different kinds of relationship here. We tried to make it as diverse as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to let the threesome go first.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, and then you have notes. Okay, and Hashim's going to start us off.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. And for those of you who are not in the morning session, again, I'm Hashim, and thank you, Professor Fletcher, who introduced me. And I am second-year PhD student in kinesiology. Actually, I'm an international student here, and I wanted to start my story from answering this question that how I came to this journey that I have to, or I should to continue my academic journey in PhD. Actually, it dates back to nearly 7 years ago, and after my graduation from master's degree, I realized that I really need to improve my skills and also knowledge in our field, kinesiology. And so, but there was an important episode called English language document. So I spent 2 years self-studying for this goal, and finally I succeed. And I suppose that the first email that I sent to Professor Bryden was late of 2017. And they had a communication by email for 3 years, but in 3 years, different issues happened. But finally, I came here in Canada in the middle of the January of 2021, and I'm so glad that I'm here. And yeah, but talking about the co-supervisors, actually, I had experience in my master's degree in my own country, Iran, that actually I was supervised by 2 professors there, and that's why I knew the challenges and the positive sides of having two supervisors. But I think the biggest challenge of having two supervisors is that as a student, you had to meet and satisfy two persons' expectations. But I suppose in my case, if supervisors knows each other well, if they have common, research areas, this challenge will return to be an opportunity. And fortunately, in my case, it returned to be an opportunity. But on the other hand, the positive sides of having two supervisors, the first is that all the time, this is again my personal idea, that two minds is better than one. And so actually, especially in our field, kinesiology, which is a multidisciplinary, field, having two supervisors who have different kind of perspectives and also research interests can help you to grow yourself as a researcher or as a student and in the future as a professional very well. And other positive side of having two supervisors is that at least you have two supporters and two more connections in a university and also other. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and we can probably tag team this one, seeing as
That's how co-supervision works.
because we share a
team.
brain, or we're better than one person.
Two for the price of
Two
one.
for the price of one, however it works.
Yeah.
I think Hashim hit on a number of things that with co-supervision, it's not just our relationship with the student, but it's our relationship and how that works. Because if we don't communicate with each other, and I think that would be kind of one of the big key pieces to bring out of probably a lot of what you'll hear today, communication between student and supervisor and co-supervision is probably one of the most important things about that mentor relationship. So you've got to be able to share your thoughts with your supervisor. They've got to be able to be open and honest with you and communicate their expectation and their needs. And in this interesting relationship, we also have to be able to communicate our expectations together so that we're not telling Hashim two different things very often. We may do it occasionally, but we do try to keep it down to the absolute minimum, because that just adds to the angst to think of being a student, is if you're getting one thing from one supervisor and a completely different thing from the other. And I would also add in that one of the that Hashim talked about, a benefit of co-supervision is the breadth, essentially, because Jennifer and I kind of come from slightly different areas within kinesiology. And so that means Hashim is actually able to get a broader view than if you just worked with myself or just worked with Jennifer, because that we're kind of bringing together two areas. So it means that what he's going to leave here with is a bigger, better package of tools that he has to take back, to apply to different jobs, to be able to do that. So that's what you want to add. Are we doing time?
Are we getting the hook?
Yeah,
Like, are we getting the
Nobody's
hook, the
hooking us yet?
proverbial hook yet? No, the only other thing I want to add that Pam had mentioned is just in general the importance of relationships. And you're all people first, and Dr. Fletcher alluded to this with her joy of mentoring. And we have to take care of you as people. Hashim landed in the middle of COVID. We couldn't see him. He couldn't be on campus. And look at it, see that I'm sure he could tell you tales over snacks in the hallway, but I can't imagine what that was like for him. New country, winter, okay, COVID. How do you meet people? How do you connect? Think of what you're doing right now today. He didn't get to do that. He had none of that.
And a stats course in the first.
And a stats course in the first.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to Canada. Welcome to Laurier. So I think this notion of communication and relationships are really important, no matter what program you happen to be in, who your supervisor has to be. Be a vocal participant in your own education. Ask for what you need. And if it's not your supervisor you can go to, you have other people that you can go to at this university. We want to take care of you. And then look to build that relationship. Find out how your supervisor works. share with your supervisor how you might need to work. There might be some learning. If you're not already coming into a lab where you know this person well, there's going to be some learning as there is in any new relationship. So I just encourage you to articulate what you need to help yourselves in your studies, and don't be afraid, you know, if you need to reach out for support, to do so. Okay? People first.
Thanks, Jeff. Ma'am. Does anyone have a burning question right now? Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's a good question. Well, as Hashim said, he'd reached out to me more years ago than I'd realized.
He found you.
He found me, and he started to describe what he was interested in. And it fell within a lot of my research, but I was starting to recognize that it was also a little outside of what I wanted or what I normally do. And so that's when I approached Jennifer and said, listen, I have a student, international student who's really interested, and you were writing scholarships at the time. So he was going through a whole scholarship process and proposal. But I know this part. So he's looking at some intellectual disability piece with respect to physical activity. And I knew this piece, but then there were some pieces that were coming from Jennifer's area. So I'm sort of the one that said, come on in. This would be really great for us.
I got
to do
hooked.
this. Yeah, she got hooked. She got dragged in. She got, I don't know, whatever.
Where you went.
And then we kind of said, this would be really good because of what you're interested in. You'll get to benefit from all of the things that Jennifer knows about and benefit from all of the things that I do. So we have a number of co-supervisions, like I co-supervise with Paula as well, and so does Jennifer. So there's a number that we do in kin. And some of that is because we do quantitative work as well as qualitative. So we're trying to bring those two pieces together because they tell really interesting stories within our field to be able to have both those points of views. So it may be a little bit more unique to the fact that kin is this very, very broad discipline from, you know, very biological kind of processes all the way to more social kinds of processes. But good question.
And can I just add to that? We don't look for it because it's not half the work. Like some people say, oh, it's half the work.
No.
You're supervising.
It's
No,
all the work.
not. We all read the same papers. We all do the same work. So if it fits, if the fit is there with the project, then it makes sense. But we don't say, oh, let's co-supervise all our students together.
Yeah. and
It's
find
only
something.
if it makes sense from a research perspective or from a methodological perspective. Thanks. Thank you. Do you want to come next, Susan? Good question. It is a good question. Well, you can come up with her. Yeah. You're together. Yeah, you're a group.
Okay, we're a group with notes because, you know, we only have 4 minutes each. So, welcome to grad school in person. Woohoo! I know some of the grad courses last year were running in person, but not all of them. So embrace that because that I think will fit with this, you know, stay in communication because now you can develop relationships face to face, which is a lot easier. One of the questions we were tasked on this panel was to just like ask or sort of describe what characterizes the student supervisor relationship and what makes it, you know, effective. I've supervised probably dozens of MA students and half a dozen PhDs to completion. But I'm here with one of my current MA students, Graham, who's just finishing up his program this term. This is the second time I've been in a room with Graham since 2019, and he took 2 courses with me and was my RA. That's what the pandemic has caused, that our you know, supervisor-student relationship has been virtual for quite a bit of it. I wanted to start with just the more general, like, you know, a graduate degree, whether it's an MA or a PhD, is a chance to start like a new level of higher education. It's not like an MA is not necessarily year 5 or 6 of your undergrad. It's this whole new level to see what your aptitude for academic type work is like, to learn skills that you hope will launch you on some career. And a supervisor is part of that. Many people would describe it as an apprenticeship, right? Now, I'm a historian, and I'm in a discipline where the majority of students, PhDs or MAs, who have history degrees don't actually become historians. It's rare. Hence, I don't view my role as a supervisor as some sort of job trainer, right? I think it's my role to kind of form a productive working relationship with my students that sees them develop, research skills, engage with methods, scholarship central to the discipline of history in this case, to nurture students at the level they're at, but also to push them a bit because I want them to develop their own, original, research project of their own choosing. And that's kind of the pinnacle of certainly in arts degrees to have done an MRP or a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation. In history, supervisors are matched with supervisors when they come into the program. And I understand most of you in the room already have your supervisors lined up, but not all programs operate like that. Graham did his undergraduate degree here at Laurier. I think he took a course with me, maybe, but he was never in my tutorial section. He never took a seminar with me. So I didn't really know him as a student. So when he was thinking of grad school, he approached me and came to office hours and we talked about what grad school might look like, and, seeing if our research interests aligned when he was in fourth year. And that was I think it was December 2019. And as I said, I've only seen him in 3 dimensions one other time before today, since then. If I had to boil things down to sort of one piece of advice, it goes with the team that's already presented, communication and contact, right? That it's so key. Do you need someone who connects you to your field? Is that what you're hoping to get from grad school? Do you need networking opportunities, publication opportunities, chances to present at conferences, etc.? Does your supervisor view you as a colleague in training or as an assistant? And what responsibilities will they trust you with? Well, probably not if they don't get to know you, if you can't develop that relationship. So this means you need to talk to one another, keep one another informed. You can work through miscommunications and clarify expectations through your program only when you're in contact with them, right? It can be easy in some programs not to stay in contact, especially Graham took a couple MA courses with me, but maybe I'm not always teaching them. So it could be I'm assigned to a student who I don't get to know in classes. I only get to know maybe if they've assigned as my TA, or maybe not until they're working on their own research project. If lines of communication are kept, aren't kept open, you might miss opportunities like RA-ships, for example. Sometimes they're predictable and sometimes not, right? Faculty members who run labs, have renewable research grants, need strong students, right? To accomplish their own research agendas. And such labs are important components to a student's own aspirations, research-wise, right? To their own programs. And maybe that's why you applied to the programs you did, right? You wanted to be part of a research team, or you wanted to participate in an ongoing research lab. In arts, major faculty grants like SHRCs, they aren't renewable. So sometimes we have them and sometimes we don't. I managed to hire Graham as an RA, but I didn't woo him to the program with that promise because I didn't know I had the funding yet. I had just a short 1-year partnership engage grant and was able to hire him in his 3rd and 4th terms as a grad student. So I didn't know I'd have funding for him beyond the TA ships, and he didn't TA for me either. When I was a grad student, my supervisor used to check in with me periodically, and as a historian, I sometimes was off in the archives for months at a time. So this was good. I mean, I think he did it monthly, and he would always, and I remember this, he always sign it, your nag. But yet there was nothing nagging about wanting to keep in touch, to keep those lines of communication open. So I've tried to do that with my own students, and students, when they know they're taking longer to write things or other things in life comes up, sometimes they don't reach out to you. So I feel as a supervisor, maybe that's a sign of a good working relationship of just, okay, hi, just how's it going? Just wanted to check in on you. Keeping connected was frankly difficult during the pandemic, right, to do it remotely, or maybe it actually was good for certain students, right? Graham and I were still able to develop a working relationship virtually. So beyond just communication, I urge you to be present on campus in particular, to connect with your supervisors, even when you're not taking courses with them. you know, in my department, faculty work in their offices, so you not only will find your committee members there, but you might just find interesting scholars sitting in their offices, you know, wanting to chat with you. So I guess my last piece of advice would be, you know, be a part of your own department's or programs culture of engagement, right? Whether those are research colloquiums or social events or whatever. And gosh, embrace that fact that we're doing it in person again. So I'll turn it over to Graham.
Yeah, I mean, everything I have to say kind of is just the student perspective of a lot of what Dr. Nyland said. Obviously, everybody has mentioned how vitally important communication is, and I can't agree with that anymore. I will say, however, like specifically when I talk about communication being important for me, especially, like I did my undergrad and my father was sick with cancer. He passed away this past October. And I've had to be very open with Dr. Nyland and with the faculty about how that's affected my progress. I'm in now the third year of what should have been a 2-year MA. So I certainly want to say, if you find once you've started this that it doesn't go as linearly as you were maybe expecting, that's okay. You will still be able to get through it, and your supervisor and the faculty will do absolutely everything that they can in order to accommodate you. But my point is that in order for them to be able to do that, you have to be very candid with your supervisors and be very open about how your experience has been going, and how that's affected your work, and be willing to, you know, sort of swallow your pride a bit and ask for an extension if you maybe didn't think that you were going to need one. Just having that ability to, yeah, essentially connect with your supervisor on a human level, in order to work out those human problems that you will eventually have to face. And on top of that, as Dr. Nyland was saying, it's not just a 5th and 6th year of an undergrad. The workload is significantly greater. So it's okay if you think that you're used to a certain level of work and you get there and you find that it's not what you're used to admit that and say, I think I need a little more time. The other thing, communication, that Dr. Nyland touched on as well is frequency. And it doesn't have to be necessarily like scheduling a time in office hours every week and stopping by for a half hour, especially, and it goes in hand with being on campus too, being physically on campus, which I would also suggest you all do, because as somebody who did their undergrad, being able to come to campus and then doing their master's remotely, I found the inability to compartmentalize my space, both physically and mentally, has been very difficult. So I've always found nice to be able to come to the library or to one of the quiet rooms on the Daub, especially if you're a history student, because that's where all your profs are going to be, basically. And being able to really do your work there, and then when you're done, leave it there, not physically, but mentally.
Don't leave your work around.
Do not
Don't
leave your
leave
work
it.
But mentally, to be able to have a space that you know is for working, and then to be able to leave that and go home and not have to worry about it. The weight of what it is you're doing in a master's is very heavy, and it's difficult if you don't really have the ability to ever put it down. So that's certainly one reason why it's good to come to campus. But the other reason, of course, is because you just tend to bump into your prof from time to time. You don't necessarily need it to be a very scheduled, formal thing. Oftentimes you can just walk by their door, and if it's open and nobody's in there, just give them a knock and pick their brains for a second about something. And you never really know. Like, I find a lot of the times what you learn most from isn't necessarily the answer to the question that you have for them, but the discussion that ends up occurring while you're in there that sort of takes place more naturally. And, you know, the number of times I've been in a prof's office where I've been having a question and they didn't necessarily know, and then another prof walks down the hall and they're like, oh, don't know, and they just flag them down and answer your question. Like,
I don't know if that's specific to the historians, but it's
No,
it's
it's not.
actually really true.
Yeah.
that
yeah, so
Literally, great. Let's just go and see if they're in their office.
Yeah.
Knock, knock, knock.
you don't get those types of interactions unless you're on campus. And the ability to just be like, well, I've just got this little thing that I want to ask about, but it's not really worth setting up a whole Zoom call for, or what have you. That's really what that's beneficial for. You just poke your head in and kind of update. And then also it just creates a more sort of colloquial colleague, like,
Yeah, collegial,
sort of relationship, which, you know, your supervisor is absolutely the master to your Padawan, if you will, like you should be going to them for. They have far more knowledge about what it is that you are doing than anybody else you really have access to. I mean, it's quite a privilege to be working with your supervisors in that sense. And from a research perspective, especially as a historian, it's one thing to be able to, you know, be really good at the Laurier Omni tool and research and stuff. But like, if I have a very specific topic I need a subject on and I ask my supervisor, they're going to have a whole list of sources that I'm not going to find till 10, 15 pages through the Laurier online library. And they can tell me exactly what part of the book I need and what will be useful. So I think basically my big point is be very open with your supervisor and try to just interact with them frequently. It doesn't have to be formal or anything necessarily, just keep that up.
Thanks,
Great.
Susan and Graham. Thank you for your story. That was, I think he's giving us a really good lesson here, and that is be open, be transparent with your supervisor. We can't help you unless we know
Yeah,
what's
exactly.
going on.
And you don't
Right.
have to be the person who got 90s in every class and handed all their projects in early like a crazy person, because that's not me.
Are there any questions?
Okay, we'll go with the last group and then we'll open it up to questions, okay? Thanks, Matt.
I think Mike's gonna start.
Oh, okay, Mike.
Yes, hello, everyone. It's nice to see you here in person. I think some really good points have already been made, so I'm going to try not to repeat too many of them, but two of the most important, I think, are communication with your supervisor frequently, and honesty with your supervisor. So I'll share an analogy with you that I really like about graduate studies and the supervisor trainee relationship. And it's that most graduate students, I think, when you think about research especially, but graduate studies in general, it's as if for the student, you're starting on the outside of a forest and the finish line is on the other side. And I think a lot of students have this idea that their supervisor is up top in a helicopter and can see their path through the forest clearly. And they know what you're going to do and where you're going to end up, and things are going to be a nice straight line. But that's not the reality of graduate studies and research. Your supervisor is down on the ground with you. The only difference is they're wiser. They've done it before, and they've helped many other students make the same journey. It's a different journey, but it's the same forest. Right, and so you have to think of the relationship in that way, and that's why frequent communication and being honest and asking questions about your project, about life, about other things that you experience as you go through graduate studies, your supervisor can be extremely helpful. And so setting those expectations at the beginning of the journey is really important. And it's not just about the work. The work is obviously important, but there may be other things that you want to do, or things your supervisor think you might be good at that you don't see. And so, you know, you want to engage and cultivate that relationship to help yourself explore those other opportunities as well. I think in the interest of not repeating the other really good points that have been made, I'll end things there. You know, just remember that your supervisor is also supervising other students. So for you, it's about your journey, but for them, they have lots of other journeys that they're on as well. And so being patient, coming to the realization probably earlier is better that you're going to fail, and things aren't going to be a straight line, and you may not end up doing what you planned you would be doing in the beginning. And that's why your supervisor is there to help you on that journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So you might have failures, but you're not going to fail overall. Here's your supervisor.
You'll graduate.
Yeah. Yes. So there's gonna be like really lots of common themes here. As we were sitting over there listening to the rest of the people, I thought, well, we can just leave because they've said everything that Mike and I kind of talked about in advance. So I'll just share a few of my own personal thoughts. It maybe not anything too new that you haven't already heard in the last little bit, but you know, when Paula first invited me, I thought about how I would describe my supervisory style, and for me, for what it's worth, I think of myself as sort of flexible and adaptable, and recognizing that not every student needs the same thing as another student, and so trying to be adaptable that way and give students what they want. And then thought about what my goal is in terms of supervising, and it is getting them through that forest to the finish line. And to me, that means independence. A student leaving my lab as more independent than when they started. And then when I thought about how I do those things, how I am adaptable and how I try to make students more independent, it is exclusively through communication. Right? You have to talk to your student, you have to understand what their goals are, what their style is, what their expectations are. And the only way you can figure that out is by open, honest, and frequent communication. So then I thought, okay, well, now I need to translate that into advice for you as students entering these new relationships for the first time. And I think you've gotten all the advice that you need already. You know, and that's to be your own advocate and to initiate the communication, because not every supervisor will have the same amount of communication in the exact same style and the same goals. And so you have to make sure that you're getting what you need out of the relationship, and maybe need to take on some of the responsibility for making that happen. Right? So if you're not communicating or hearing from your supervisor as much as you'd like to hear from them, you need to tell them that and not be afraid to have the conversation. And initiate those conversations, because the more you have them, the better things will be. Likewise, maybe if they're communicating with you too much, you know, if you feel like they're sort of helicopter supervisors and watching over your shoulder all the time, you have to sort that out sooner rather than later and figure out how you're going to make the relationship work for you as well. And again, you only have that by talking frequently and honestly. The other thing that came up when Mike and I were chatting a little bit was, you know, don't forget that you have an advisory committee, and you don't only have to talk to those people on your advisory committee when you know, have a meeting or a defense or whatever. If you want other advice along the way, they are resources for you too, and you can have communication with them and they can help you navigate things as need be. So again, as like Mike said, I'm not going to reiterate everything that you've heard. So I think I'll maybe stop there, Paula, and happy to take questions.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I don't know what's going on in biology, but I want one of these helicopters. You both mentioned helicopter. We don't have them in Ken, but I'm just saying.
I can hook you up.
Field
Okay,
study.
perfect. I'm glad, because I like a helicopter. So I think one of the common key threads is obviously communication, which I'm hoping you understand is really important. And I know Matt said, you know, if you're not talking to your supervisor as much as you want, go and talk to them. You need to do that. And it's easy for us as faculty to say, oh, come and talk to us. But really, we want you to. So if there's an issue, we can't fix it unless you tell us. You need to be open with us and tell us that, and make contact with your supervisors or your TAC or your DAC, depending on what level you're in. And just a quick note, some of my grad students during COVID had not seen me for over a year. And finally they said to me, we really want to see you. And I know we can't see you on campus. So if we come to the end of your driveway and you put out lawn chairs and you sit at the top of your driveway, can we have meetings that way? So we did a few times, just in order to have that contact. It was different than on Zoom. But if they hadn't told me they wanted that, I wasn't going to say, hey, can you come sit in a lawn chair outside of my driveway? I'll make coffee and we'll have a conversation. So be open and honest and transparent and advocate for yourself. Matt, that was like excellent. So be your own advocate. And so I'd like to open it now to questions. Do you have any questions for this panel? Or online, if there's any. Here's a chance. Oh, please do. Go ahead.
Wondering, I know that
topics change? What happens when it changes so drastically that it no longer parallel with your? Yeah, and so I'm just going to repeat the question again so that people on Zoom can hear, because there are people on Zoom. So the question was, what happens if your thesis changes to such an extent during your journey that you might not mesh or match with your supervisor anymore? Who would like to field that one? You, okay, yeah. Can you come up here and,
Sure.
yeah,
I just have something small to say.
no, that's
but
good.
I think at the beginning of your graduate studies, when you start to design your project, you want to think about that scope, and obviously things are going to change. But if you design it well enough, that shouldn't bring you so far away from that goal that you would have to change supervisors, but I think it does happen. I haven't seen it happen, and it hasn't happened to me, so maybe I'll let others speak about what happens in that situation, but thinking about the design of your project is really important.
Thanks for that. Susan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, programs sometimes can be flexible in how they support students, especially as, your research interests genuinely change, just particularly if you have a program that has coursework up front, where all of a sudden something like drops in your lap and it just lights up your head and you want, like, I want to do more of this. And that might not be the forte of your supervisor. There are limits, but I don't know. I mean, history, we have a joint program with Guelph and Waterloo. So we have, and I'm co-supervising an MA student for that very reason, for a Guelph student, because it shifted away from the initial supervisor, and we found a co-supervision would be the way to address it. I did the same for a PhD student in geography as their project became more and more historical geography and lots of archival work, which was not the expertise of the other committee members. And so I shifted from being just a committee member on that dissertation to being a co-supervisor. So there are some solutions. They might be unique to your program as well. Like, again, TRIU history program, we have resources at 2 other universities too. So that's maybe more than some departments can when students shift. But again, that would be the let your supervisor know that that's what's going on, because you want to address it as sooner rather than later. I will say this conversation as a former grad coordinator in history, I also will say Laurier loves its bureaucracy, and its bureaucracy grad studies sometimes has deadline, due dates and deadlines if you're putting petitions for GSEC. So the sooner your supervisor knows, the sooner the supervisor could say, okay, you're gonna it's fine. You can go inactive for a term, or it's fine. You need to petition for a coursework extension, but you have to make these deadlines, and it just makes things easier. And again, you have to talk and be as frank as you can.
And let me just add to that, if by chance you're in the program for 2 months and you just decide, I really don't like this area anymore, it's better that you tell the supervisor if you want to switch to someone else. That has happened in Kin several times, that you start going in one direction and then you decide, okay, I'd actually rather be here. If you can't fix the problem with co-supervision, you might have to switch supervisors. It's not an everyday thing, but it has happened that an interest, comes to you that you didn't know about that you had, and you want to switch. A supervisor would want you to be happy with your topic, not be unhappy and not want to do it. Correct? We don't want you working on a project that you're not going to give 100% if your heart is over with another project. Pam, Jen, Matt, did you want to add something to that? Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if there's any common misconceptions of like supervisor responsibilities, or something that has come up like with students that, yeah, just seems to be a misconception about supervisor responsibility.
Okay, yeah, let me just, do you want to reword it to people on Zoom?
Sorry, I forgot.
No, come up though. Are there any common misconceptions about faculty responsibilities?
Yeah.
I would say the first thing that came to my mind when you asked that question was that your supervisor knows all the regulations of your program. Honestly, like, and even people that have been around for many, many years. We, like Mike said, you know, there's lots of things going on and we often don't remember this deadline or that milestone or whatever needs to be done. And so I would strongly encourage you to become familiar with the regulations of your program on your own and plan ahead so that you're not relying on someone else to tell you. That's the first thing.
Matt had my job before me, so he was associate dean before me, and he was grad coordinator as well. You weren't grad coordinator. I was grad coordinator. Pam's been grad coordinator. Susan's been grad coordinator. When we're no longer grad coordinator, sometimes some of that stuff like leaves our brain. We can't keep everything in there. So if your supervisor doesn't know, ask the grad coordinator. There's a bunch of different people you can ask. You can ask your supervisor, you can ask other people on your TAC or your DAC, you can ask your grad coordinator, you can go to one of the associate deans, myself or Patty Goff. We're happy to answer questions. So there's